conversation between Quetzal of the Plejarian Federation and Billy Edward Albert Meier, being 914th Contact Monday, July 21st, 2025, 14.25.
This is a DeepL translation.
Hey, Quetzal, welcome and greetings.
Greetings to you, too. I'm coming 3 days early today and told you so this morning. But what happened in the morning and what we registered?
Yes, but talking openly about what happened today at 8 p.m. is probably not clever and probably doesn't make sense. But if we're going to do it anyway, then only in the form of this time, everyone living here realized it. And in my opinion, that's how everyone sees everything, because...
Yes, that's right. But then we can talk about it later, because I've brought you something, namely these photocopies, my grandfather's statement to you from the year 1947. I have also photographed this poem of yours, which you wrote in 1946 from his estate, whereby we all think that at the present time, and as a result of everything that has happened in the last 5 decades of the 20th century, and during the last 2.5 decades of this millennium, as well as what is happening here on Earth now, these should be mentioned openly. Back then, you and my grandfather observed together what would happen in the future, which is why you wrote the poem. You were forbidden to pass on and publicize it in full, but only in part. But now we think that you should now publish the complete poem, not the abridged one, as you have already done. You may remember that when I briefly...
Yes, that's enough, and I think I know what it's about. You can dictate both to me when you have time, so I can put it here, since we're talking now.
I want to do that now.
As you wish, then I want to switch on the computer. Good, then you can start.
Then I'll start with my grandfather's explanations.
Declaration by Svath on Tuesday, May 6, 1947.
Today, I have more important things to explain to you, so that you will know what your future holds for you, some of which you cannot call pleasant. And everything that I am now explaining to you, I will of course record as usual and include in my remarks of my legacy as what has been explained to you as a whole. Thus everything will be preserved. Consequently, all those who will enter into my succession to the connection with you and maintain it, in particular my son, Ptah, will then be so knowledgeable that you will be aligned with them. So it will mainly be my son Ptah who will be at your side in every way to support you. He will also reproduce some of the things I have explained from my legacy in his own words, and thus make corrections about you in order to set you and your work right in the face of those who negate you. The fact that I have to explain to you only today some important things about your coming life is due to the fact that I was instructed to do so at this time and not earlier, so that you will be able to combine what I have to explain now with what I have explained to you over the last few years. So listen to what I have to explain.
Lies and slander will be brought against you, just as your writings and books, as well as your other materials in the coming and distant future, will be falsified. Therefore, it will inevitably be necessary for you to record everything in writing and keep it as an original, so that it is preserved in this way. There will be many in the future who will be degenerate in character and woefully uneducated, that they will unscrupulously accuse you of lying and cheating and selfishness through lies and deceit and forgeries, as well as against your better judgment in false testimony. And as you already know, your life is already being sought after by religious adversaries, which will accompany you many times throughout your life and cause you injuries, but which you will survive well into old age, as I have fathomed. However, although you now know this through me, I have to advise you to be careful yourself, because all of this intrigue that jeopardizes your life will always be carried out through devious and insidious actions and ways. As a result, you can and will never be given complete security. No matter where you are in the world, which you will first walk through alone for many years, and earn the necessary sustenance for your life with a variety of labors. But even then, you will not be safe, for those who are filled with religious hatred towards you, as well as those who will persecute you through the world, as well as seek your life. Like those earthly people who are malicious in their thoughts and often try in some way to achieve this by harming or manipulating someone in a devious way. Consequently, you will not be safe even in a foreign country, and there will be insidious attempts to throw you out of life, whereby at first only religious hatred will be the motive, but this will then be further fueled by hatefulness if you openly admit in the media that you are in contact with us. However, it is important that you first conceal the fact that we are at home in the Plejarian system of the Ankar parallel universe. Because until then, when you can openly announce this, a long time will pass and you will always only vaguely mention that we come from the Pleiades stars of this cosmos. This is correct as far as it goes, because we are moving about 500 light-years into this dimension of this Dern universe in their vicinity, in order to reach deeper into the space of the Milky Way galaxy, as you call it, via the area of the Pleiades stars, and then on to Earth. As a result of a misunderstanding, this will cause various deceitful people to lie about maintaining connections with travelers from the depths of the Pleiades system, and even being entitled to fly with their jet ships. However, all this will be just as deceitful as other lying, fraudulent claims of the same kind regarding other travelers who have actually been conducting their observations and research in earthly airspace for a very long time, as you know from our own observations. And the fact that you refer to these travelers from afar as foreigners should be retained in future, and you should never mention where they come from. In future, you should also never openly mention everything that you have already seen and experienced with me on our excursions, including the fact that in many cases the information provided by geoscientists is only conjecture and not the actual truth. In particular, you should not give any precise information about what actually happened in early times, although you may well say that a group of people who traveled a long way back, more than 280,000 Earth years ago, abandoned people and various beings on all the continents of the Earth without means, but who then went wild here. You may also say that very few of them have been able to reproduce in very small groups and survive undetected to this day, and will be able to do so for some time to come. Sometimes they can be observed sporadically, as you know from your own experience, which will also be preserved in this way in the future, and will then, unfortunately, result in irresponsible people organizing hunts for these creatures in order to kill them, which will not be right. This will happen especially in America, when feuds arose among the wild ones and they fought each other far and wide, and as a result, some groups were completely wiped out. Consequently, only extremely isolated groups of beings remained, just as it happened in the eastern regions of the Earth, where only isolated groups remained and live hidden in the forests today and for a long time to come. The whole thing happened many thousands of years ago. Before, in the more recent period of 10,000 and up to 15,000 years ago, people transmigrated from Siberia to North America via the mainland of the Bering continent connection known to you. However, as far as connections between Earth people and travelers from the Pleiades are concerned, I am not aware of any such connections, but I do know that these travelers carry out abductions for research purposes, whereby they do this not only with Earth people against their will, but also with all kinds of animals, creatures, and other life forms of fauna and flora. And since the various travelers from afar are peaceful and also very unpeaceful, we keep our distance from them in every way and do not allow them to locate us in any way. which means absolutely no problems for us, since their technical possibilities of all kinds are far inferior to ours. As for what I have to explain to you further regarding your safety, my findings through my research in the future have shown that, according to earthly time, you will not return to your homeland until the year 1969, after you marry in Greece, which will be the intended purpose for you to settle down and begin the task of your worldwide mission. And as I have explained to you before, you will be slandered and further attacked by malicious people worldwide, and your life will be further threatened. Even what will be at your side as a chosen one will not bring you happiness, not even for your safety or your work. The opposite will be the case, as well as betrayal, danger, and slander, after which you will free yourself after more than 30 years and find your true happiness. Because in honesty and true love, you will be together until old age. And this will still be the case when you will be more than 23 times older than you are today at the age of 10. Because your journeys with me through times of the past and the future, and all those that will come after me, will take many years. You already have 13 years to add to your present earthly age, which you are not able to perceive physically due to our influence, but in such a way that the evolution of your consciousness has progressed years beyond your earthly age. That is why your perception of the whole of physical nature and of all physical things in general is so much more developed than that of people of your age on Earth. You therefore see the outside of what is truly real as an effective reality, which sharpens your mind and also gives your reason the ability for self-reflection and critical observation of all things. This is how, through your attention to perception, you create everything that happens with full naturalness and wisdom through your thoughts into a context of comprehensive understanding and action. In doing so, you have also developed the ability to form abstract thinking far beyond your age, and to give everything normal and valuable a clear meaning, which also has an effect on your physical body and all its functions, because the whole has been transferred, so to speak, as an acquired wisdom to your whole body and to your material consciousness, in addition to the fact that everything has also been transferred to your creative life force energy. This ensures that you can make vital use of your lifetime, and that you will continue to learn and be active into old age. This is because you were so influenced by us during the times you traveled with me, which will continue to be the case until the end of your life, that everything necessary has changed and become embedded in you and has resulted in the way it is now and will continue to develop. It should also be explained that only hours or days pass here in the absence of the present time, whereas we are traveling for days, weeks, or even months, and will continue to do so in the future. This will also be the case when I have gone, and others will continue my work with you. Consequently, you will always be many decades older than just the years of your normal earthly lifetime. Your normal lifetime on Earth, however, will be burdened by all kinds of malicious attacks and slander against your honor and dignity, as well as against your life. Everything will be so foul and pronounced that I can only call it very low thinking and dishonorable. These characterless degenerations will be extremely vulgar, obscene, and vulgar. Everything that will be unjustly labeled against you in the future, especially by believers who are addicted to religion, will be insulting and shameful. People who suffer from envy and become vengeful, as well as those addicted to negation, will hate you, and you will also, when you begin your task of spreading the truth and commit yourself to it, be defamed with degenerate malicious insults, just as you will be accused of deception. Your true nature will be judged contrary to your true character traits. But this will reveal the lack of decency and the true character of all those people who will insult and slander you, and who have appropriated their own lowliness of nature. These will be people whose intellectual potential will reveal their defective and lacking reason, because they will lack strength of conscience as well as a righteous character formation. They will think up their evil and malicious slander in stupidity and try to publicize it in the media. But they will not be able to recognize that they are only harming themselves and making themselves personally unworthy, as well as discrediting and denigrating themselves. Eduard, you will teach man and denounce all that is religious, namely everything that corresponds to the confused belief in God from time immemorial, and that has come about through the admiration and worship of the long-standing travelers from the far reaches of this Dern universe who have appeared on Earth. In truth, as I explained to you early on, they came here to expand their living space, but in a domineering and unpeaceful manner. In this way, they also spread out on Earth and were able to rise above the people of Earth, which was also possible for them because they were able to do all sorts of things with their highly developed technology, which seemed to the people of Earth like miracles of high powers from heaven. However, it should be noted that the concepts of God and gods were not known at that time, but only emerged much later, namely at the time of Christianity. It was only through Christianity that they came to be used, as other terms were first used, as was initially the case with the primordial human beings who believed that animals and similar creatures, as well as natural phenomena and natural events, were high powers. Later on, as I have already explained to you in other conversations, it came about that travelers from afar came from the far reaches of this cosmos and hunted down the early, Earth-created beings, and later also their distant descendants and their descendants, etc., and almost wiped them out. Apart from a few survivors who have remained hidden in the smallest groups throughout the ages in large jungle areas to this day, and will remain so for a long time to come. And just as the travelers from afar already did it, so will the people on Earth, as the actual very distant descendants of the travelers from afar, do it irresponsibly in the present and coming times, for they will also engage in hunting in order to irresponsibly indulge in their joys of killing and eradicate traditional life. However, it should also be mentioned that at first the faraway travelers were considered to be miracle workers, but then, out of a desire for power, they occasionally dared to fight each other in very destructive wars, committing atrocities and also using nuclear weapons, which will be proven by archaeological methods and future technical achievements. As a result of this emerging enmity and the wars, the rule of the faraway travelers inevitably came to an end, and their former existence fell into oblivion. Consequently, their former presence on Earth has remained completely unknown until the present day, but this will change again when the ancient but increasing appearance of the faraway travelers with their ray ships will recall the old, and archaeological research will prove what really happened in the early and earliest times. This will happen when new emerging archaeological methods will reveal many of the historical events of the former presence and thus the former existence of the faraway travelers on Earth. For a very long time to come, the false and fictitious and non-existent fantasy power of one god, as well as the invented power of supposedly many gods, will make people on Earth dependent in faith and even fanatical to the point of murder and profiteering. Due to the delusion of religion and its deceptions, mankind on Earth will remain fanatical believers and extremely pathologically dependent on the delusion of God for a long time to come. Eduard, you will never be dictating in any way, but you will remain humble and never put yourself on an equal footing with all those or associate with them. Consequently, you will also never place yourself above another person and elevate yourself, neither mentally or emotionally, nor in any other way. My son Patar will give you ideas and suggestions as to what work, duties or tasks, etc. you will have to do, but you alone will determine how, where and when you will do it. Your task will require a variety of activities, so you will also have to learn a great deal of manual labor and anything and everything. And you will be a person who, through your own initiative, will acquire a wide range of specialist knowledge and skills and know how to carry out many different tasks. but you will lose your left arm in an accident, but you will still work with heavy pickaxes and shovels and, as a one-armed man, do work that only men with two arms can do. You will never be comfortable enough to ever be without work, because, Eduard, this will be a necessity for you according to your own sense. You will build up everything through a great deal of expertise in various professional fields and through tireless manual labor, and with the help of like-minded people who will be early members of the community and who will assist in the construction work. Unfortunately, none of the employees will be professionals in terms of manual skills and knowledge, but their labor will be a great relief. Thus, a place of residence for a center community will be commendably built, to which these helpers will also contribute financially. But the main part of the construction will be carried out by you, for which you will collect the necessary funds in Asia through life-threatening work. You will also contribute all the necessary machinery, tools and various building materials to build and manage the community's refuge, which you will regard as your duty, take care of and be concerned about, so that everything will succeed. When you finally return to your homeland after many years and begin your mission, you will also have to take on the work of building the houses and preparing the land, as well as all the food, cleaning and hygiene supplies, the production of the scriptures, etc., and also the leadership of the community, which will come together in that place on high, that you know, and create a worldwide connection. You will be responsible for everything that is to be created and will become, be it for the household or the entire business. But, Eduard, you will remain humble and never seize power. And you will not be a profiteer, but will constantly endeavor to ensure that no one person in the community ever becomes dominant, for otherwise it could not exist in the long term. Therefore, you will have to take care, even in small things, that nothing of the kind of domination ever arises even in the slightest possibility. Never and absolutely in no way should a person of power or a ruler be able to take the scepter over the community, for it must be free and independent in all things, and this must remain so for all time. It will be the case, and I also have to explain this to you, that unfortunately the authorities will want to prevent your efforts to design the residential center and the site at the place on the heights for a long time, and that unsavory machinations will be undertaken over many decades in order to maliciously ensure that you and your followers can work successfully worldwide undisturbed in order to spread your mission. There will be extremely unfair official decrees, and all kinds of intrigues will be invented to harass and drive you and the community away, because it will be a decades-long endeavor for various religious believers and their fanaticism of the authorities to silence you and the community through unfair decrees and the like, and to make you give up the mission and move away from the area of the place and the entire surrounding area. A neighborhood that you will turn into a paradise through your own initiative, which on the one hand is of the meadows. Fields and forests will be enlivened by various wild animals, just as all kinds of species and species of birds will come to live there and soil organisms will spread again. And again I say this, because it will be at that time that you will acquire everything in a state of degradation and actual decay. All the buildings, the meadows, extensive forest, which will, however, be extensively deforested, and all the extensive land, which will also include much of the neighboring cantonal territory. You already know everything because you have been there hiking with your parents, and your mother knows everything because she was born nearby and knows her way around the area. The whole thing is still in the best condition, as you have seen for yourself, but the decline of the whole thing will soon begin and will be very bad if you acquire everything in 30 years. And this acquisition will be against the wishes of the high authorities, who want to acquire the whole thing pro forma and thus supposedly for the state, which is supposed to be very disingenuous for. In this regard, some land and forest from the existing territory that you will acquire will also be sold to. Everything will be handled in secret and will not be publicized. because you will still be able to acquire the whole thing, because the owners will owe you a lot of money and will sell everything to you in return. But there will be constant surveillance afterwards, which, what I have to explain further, is that many believers of religions and their sects, especially where you will form the community, as well as in the area of authority and in the surrounding area, will not like the fact that you will deal with hard and thorough enlightenment and spread the truth. Namely that all of the religious fanaticism, as well as some of the very evil fanaticism resulting in this regard, is all about lies and deception. This, as well as the fact that the emergence of many other diverse beliefs in a single god or gods arose through the appearance of the far heavenly travelers from the depths of space.
Note Billy 2025. The terms God and gods originated in the Germanic language area and are derived from the Indo-European term gu, which meant to call and to invoke, etc. It is assumed that the gods were beings invoked by earthlings who had traveled far and wide and were referred to by magic words. Over the course of time, the word Gur evolved and became the term God in Christianity, which then also found its way into Islam and various other religions and their sects. Etc. Christianity, HEASA Divine Trinity, namely God, Son, and Holy Spirit, although there are various sects in this religion, as there are in Islam. These, like other religions and sects, generally have a single god, while Hinduism in India has more than 330 million goddesses, gods, and their attributes, energies, and powers.
Furthermore, it will turn out that you will be hated because you will openly intervene against the emerging rampant overpopulation of the world population, which will multiply to around 10 billion within the next 80 years.
Note Billy 2025. In 1947, the human population of the Earth was around 2.5 billion. The normal human population for planet Earth would be 500 million to 530 million.
Due to their irresponsible behavior and their greed for wealth, the planet will be so extensively impaired and damaged by the exploitation and plundering of its natural resources that it will rebel. And nature will be badly harassed and destroyed to a large extent, and its diverse life in all its fauna and flora will also be largely wiped out, which will be calculated in tens of thousands every year.
Note, Billy 2025. Between 50,000 and 60,000 genera and species of wild animals and plants are currently extinct every year.
Nature and its flora will be deprived of nutrients and fauna of food and poisoned. And the habitat of nature and its fauna and flora will be largely robbed and wildlife of all genera and species largely wiped out by the sheer excess of the future irresponsible human population. This, just as the sheer mass of humanity on Earth will take away the habitat of all remaining wildlife, as I mentioned. But this will not only be on the land, in floodplains, meadows, ice deserts, and also in swamps, moors and the skies, mountains and around volcanoes, but also in the seas down to their deepest depths, as well as in lakes, rivers, streams, and all other land waters. However, this will also happen on land areas on which 1,000 different poisons are spread, especially by agriculture and industry without conscience, just as much land and water will be contaminated and poisoned by other impurities of civilization. A wide variety of artificial materials will also pollute the land. Forests, floodplains, meadows, moors and swamps, and also the mountains at the highest altitudes, as well as lakes, rivers, and other bodies of water, and practically all the seas. Many genera and species of marine life as well as birds. Land wildlife and forests will ingest these poisonous materials as indigestible food, which will then accumulate in their stomachs, causing much and countless wildlife to perish and die a miserable death. However, future humanity on Earth will be unscrupulous in the face of this crime and will even promote it indifferently for a long time, as well as the poisoning of the atmosphere and the destruction of the planet through its excessive exploitation of its resources. And this will not be all, for through the fault of mankind, the climate will change with an upheaval in such a way that the climate zones will shift on a large scale to new areas of the Earth where new climatic conditions will arise and prevail. The tropical areas of the Earth will change, and their foothills will shift into the temperate zones of the north and as far as the polar regions, causing them to succumb to heat and warmth. This climate collapse will not only bring many changes for humans, with deadly effects due to the heat, for example. However, it will also have a negative impact on the entire in the future. The natural life of fauna and flora will undergo unexpected and major changes that will require mankind to make many well-considered and important changes to nature. The natural vegetation that will emerge in the future will require a necessary remodeling of the vegetation with regard to various plants, in particular by neophytes or alien plants from other countries, which can reproduce and spread independently, especially in Europe. This will be mankind's duty of reason in everything, contrary to what nature normally arranges, but which mankind will in future increasingly disregard, harass, and damage, thus destroying the naturalness of its independence. As a result, Earth humans will in future be obliged to support the function of nature for as long and as far as possible, so that it can recover and become independent again. However, this means that in the future, earthly man in his illusory knowledge and megalomania will not place himself above nature and in his delusion of ability. Knowledge and expertise will not want to be more powerful than creation or nature itself. In the future, neophytes will be vital for the entire existence of nature in the times to come. This is because the Earth's climate will change in the future, the beginning of which began around 400 years ago, through the fault of the growing human population, which should not exceed 500 or at most 530 million for this planet. This is a truth, however, that mankind is criminally disregarding, in particular through the lying religion of Christianity, with its mendacious statement, "Go and multiply." It must be said, however, that in the future it will be neophytes that do not pose a problem and do not become invasive. Nor do they displace native plants, which means that they cannot cause damage in ecological, health, or economic terms. Unfortunately, as I have found out, an organization will emerge in Switzerland in the future that will falsely deal with the planting of neophytes, and falsely take defensive measures against alien plants, and falsely claim that certain neophytes are invasive, or that their seeds are carried by birds or wild animals, etc. This will not be true. But this will not be true, so a ban on certain neophyte shrubs and bushes will be nonsensical. As a result of the new climate, nonsensical bans will be imposed on neophytes in future in order to control their spread and prevent them from becoming invasive. Although it will be mendaciously claimed, with complete know-it-all attitude, ignorance, and as a result of aversion to neophytes, that certain neophyte plants are invasive, when in fact they are not. Invasive neophytes will only be very few, which as a rule will have nothing to do with woody plants and shrubs, or small shrubs, but on the other hand with various neophyte perennials, which fall under invasive plants, but which in this respect only appear in sparse genera and species, and with some effort and caution can easily be prevented from spreading. You will be openly branded and hated for spreading this truth, and for much more, and your life will be sought after. So it will no longer just be the sectarian forces, but also those who will be the evil profiteers of the mass population, the military, politics, various authorities, and all know-it-alls. Many stupid adversaries will also appear against you worldwide, who will use a technology that is still futuristic now, but which will be part of everyday use in the future, in order to insult and deny you around the world. This in order to make you and the teaching of truth impossible, which you have to carry out in dissemination on the whole earth, and which evil spirits will try to block. Especially those will not be friendly and kind to you, who are a pacifist, who will be fond of lies, falsehood, religious faith, violence, hateful thinking, deceit and deceitfulness, as well as domination and malice and bellicism, or the glorification of war. This, as well as militaristic fanatics, because you will also endeavor to make them openly responsible for waging wars that irresponsible and thoughtless vindictive leaders command. And if you continue to call the armies and militaries murderous organizations, as you have often done, then I can only find this designation correct and recognize it as correct in spirit. And I would like to say the following about this, which I would like you to say openly, because your words are good, and as you yourself defined and wrote in your still youthful age of only 10 years regarding peace, because people on earth should strive for it after the world war that has taken place. You wrote,
"Peace instead of war is a basic need of peaceful and balanced people who genuinely desire peace and have developed their own pacifist thinking and basic behavior and live accordingly. And if nasty disputes arise and become unavoidable, then balanced people resolve them through logical, verbal, normal communication alone, or possibly by using a loud voice and shouting or screaming to resolve the problem. This can occur in a wide variety of conflicts and never degenerates into violence. Because if a person has formed himself in honest righteousness and balance and leads his life accordingly, then he also behaves in an unshakably, consciously pacifist manner towards himself. However, this requires that the awareness of the value of peace is strengthened, and that the whole of peacefulness is also emitted in this respect so that it can be visibly recognized externally, and possibly even perceived by fellow human beings in terms of vibration. A person's peace, which can be perceived by fellow human beings in any way, should always be a personal call from the person to themselves, because every peace of every individual should be a personal call to the world. Man begins by thinking for himself and shaping his own peaceful basic behavior within himself and in the immediate environment of his fellow human beings.
And these, Eduard, are your wise words of your young age, which should be held up to all adults of earthly mankind and followed by them. And with that, Eduard, I have told you everything that needs to be explained today.
So then I dictated to you what my grandfather suggested to you in May 1947, so I now have to continue. Dictating the poems that you wrote after my grandfather and you were in the future and saw what would happen. And if it is all right with you, then we will also have a lot to talk about at the end of the conversation, which you are not supposed to write down, and I will therefore not dictate to you later.
What will happen in the world in the coming decades and in the third millennium?
The Third World War has now ended with 65 million dead, but everything is only a sham peace. The people of the earth are being deluded, because evil Nazism will rise again in the new millennium. Soon a new Nazi mentality will rise up in state leaderships, and will be created in America and again in Germany in a world-greedy manner, truthfully created by the mentality of power-hungry rulers. And many wars will be waged worldwide by America in greed to achieve complete world domination in an evil manner, as has been the case since time immemorial. In the future, this will have a great impact on the distant descendants who were murdered by the Nazi Empire, but who will now have a country called Israel, which will soon be a fact. From this, however, a murderer man will emerge in the future, who will disturb the world because he will wage war mercilessly like Hitler against innocent people. He will have the army murder women, children, and other patient people. All nations will stand by and watch all the murders as usual. So all the powerful leaders of all states will do nothing to stop the murderer and the murderous army. To stop the murders, to hold them all accountable, and to bring them to due punishment. Only in later years will reason and responsibility emerge, when, as a result of the Israeli genocide, reason will prevail, and other states of the world will want to break off the top of the genocide and break all the aid of other states to the evil murderer. But until then, it will cost the lives of women, children and men. That is what will happen in the next millennium in the Middle East. But then from America, the mad dictator will come to condemn the majority, who will then devote themselves to reason and sanity. America will continue to create discord and wars far into the future, and through its old greed for world domination, it will round up everything that falls into the clutches of America's armies from foreign states, to which no escape is possible, and every urge for freedom is denied. And so it will effectively come to pass, as the distant future viciously shows, because in this and in the third millennium, the greed for war is still on the rise, especially led by world-greedy America, with lies and deceit, completely unscrupulously and maliciously fueled by the greed for world domination. America will, as it has done since time immemorial, greedily and stubbornly reach for world power, soaping up countries against Russia, which will emerge from the Soviet Union in order to achieve world power, with lies, intrigue, smuggling and deceit, and with great bloodshed the whole world will turn pale. As has been the case since time immemorial, the entire governmental gang of the earth will look on, and neither they nor any noble person will stand up against it. Cowardice, indifference and irresponsibility will be rampant, and will happen soon and also far into the next millennium, because America will strive incessantly with powerful world power, so it will rise presidential dictatorial in the next millennium, so the parties of America will cower in cowardice before the dictator. All the leaders of all states will scurry around in cowardice, will only be full-bodied and unscrupulously let America have its way, will only create evil and world-powerful wars. The coming Russia will be forced into a war by America, because America, breaking its promises, will invade the East, namely in the European area, with a malicious, lying, murderous organization, formed with lies in the near future for the nasty world domination annexation, with lies and deceit to preserve alleged peace and security, but in truth to win world domination with certainty, by deceiving all the member states of the International Defense Alliance war, murdering, destroying for America to the bottom. So America will want to win world domination through war lies. The member states are to pull the chestnuts out of the fire with war, while America laughs neatly into its dirty fists, while the coming international murder organization does everything that America is rapidly advancing with. Its insane world domination as, and finally crushes all freedom and all peace of the whole world. However, the world will still suffer many crazy evils in the new millennium, through America's dictatorial machinations, through a power grazing, then through a confused and crazy transgression of clear reason, as a result of which all the world's leaders will kowtow to America in the future. And America will have a vicious war waged in neighboring countries in Eastern Europe by the coming Russia, as a successor to the Soviet Union, in order to be able to satisfy its greed for world domination in this underhanded way, with the help of Germany, whose arms deliveries will grant peace, which will be delivered to the warring country in fear of America, whereby the war will be maintained for a long time and a great deal will fall into ruin. But soon America, in its poisonous addiction to world domination, will begin further intrigues and wars around the world, and in its evil delusion, it will act as the world police, and without any mercy. And this will be as it has always been, ever since America has existed and always will be. Peace will come in the next few years, but peace will never come. But even many state leaders all over the world would then live without their knowledge, thinking nothing, acting maliciously as well as acting all the time in blind conscience, which all happened evil with murders in the Nazi Empire. What an evil disgrace, so it will be in the new millennium, as it already corresponded to Hitler. The Nazi mentality, which lurks in the background, without their knowledge, in many rulers in the new millennium in Germany, will cool them down to a raging hostility, peacelessness, and negative leadership of the people, thus dividing them into dissatisfaction and opinion as a result of the shock. Many rulers will follow America's wishes, participate completely unquestioningly, falsely and stupidly in global warfare, supply weapons for murder to the evil debacle, for wars that America provokes deceitfully and with hegemony to conquer the coming Russia, as it will be called in the future, deceitfully, as well as blazing maliciously in the delusion of lousy world domination greed. This is how Sfath, the wise, and I have seen it. Therefore let it be said now, and therefore also because the German government will fail in the future in steering. Repeating this, secretly demanded by America, what a mockery! As criminal as it was in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, a mad clown in Eastern Europe, living in a mad warmongering frenzy, will become a state leader and beggingly call for weapons to be delivered in the American plan to fulfill the war and the madness of America's sick brain, as well as the madness of America's leadership, which will lack clear sense. The clown will spread his infamy and rise to become dictator, and he will greedily live out all his evil ruler ambitions, led by America in the east of Europe against the following Russia, which results from the Soviet Union and lights up in a new guise, while America, in old world domination greed, will work in insidiousness to defeat Russia with war in Eastern Europe and to spread, evil and deceitful, by having the war waged by a clown and leaving the war-loving dictator in charge of all the dirty work, in order to be out of it itself and to ultimately shift the blame for the whole thing onto the clown, quite deceitfully and cunningly in the long term. And then, in the third millennium, an American state leadership will begin to terrorize the whole world, nonsensically in megalomania and thanks to its stupidity and thought minimization, creating an evil color and an evil lubrication. Many rulers of the future will be stupid and blind to right behavior. They will lack reason and therefore be bereft of intellect. This will be the case, according to Sfath and myself, when wisdom is demanded as a reward in Germany and the world in the next millennium. The Nazi mentality and stupidity will then become cruel to the leaders of the state, and they will be hit hard with hatred and words, as wild and roaring as a hateful mass murderer in the west of Arabia brings disaster with his army on women, children and men with malicious vengeance. Because as a Jew, he hates those who are vermin to him, of other faiths, which is why he wants to wipe out everything through genocide, full of hatred and completely blind. This is how it will be when the first quarter of the new century arrives, with America's emerging dictatorship providing vicious help.
E.D. Meier, 17.16H, Niederflax 1253, Bullock, Sunday, November 24, 1946.
That's the first one. Then I have the second one here, which you wrote in 1948, which I also want to read out and dictate right away.
Stop. I'm not going to write that down. I won't, because I can't be responsible for that. Because I can't anticipate and say something that Sfath, who is of the same opinion as I am now expressing, already said that. He explained that it would not be responsible for me to pass this on because, and I remember everything he said about it well. And what's more, I don't think there's any more to say, because all the talking is useless. And what's more, it wouldn't change anything if I were to make it official and write it down now. It would be nothing more than talking pointlessly out into the desert, and, on the other hand, it would.
Your argument is in line with reason and your responsibility, and I think you are doing the right thing with your decision. Although I am not aware of what will happen next, you can.
Agreed, but I think we can talk about it later. I think I can still remember some of the things your grandfather explained, so I know that various things wouldn't be good if they were said out loud, so I'll leave them out and just put dots. That's probably better because certain sensitive things shouldn't come up and should continue to be kept quiet and therefore not talked about. This is because certain disclosures of names, offices, incidents, and actual truths would only bring trouble, as I have always known, but as I have also been tried so many times to be blown out of existence. Besides, there are the authorities, as they were called by Svath, our low and high authorities of all kinds, namely who have an interest in me and our Figu community being made a pig of here at the center, so that we should disappear from here. And that, if it were to succeed, would be a good thing, because the Tos Valley has long been known for its widespread religious believers, including some who are not exactly well disposed towards us. To the chagrin of these confused, misguided people, we cannot return the favor, so we neither argue with them, nor disregard them, or see and treat them differently from any other person. Our motto is and always will be live and let live, because even all those people who are religious believers are, despite their faith, honorable people for us Figuans, whom we do not condemn in any way. Even if they adhere to a religious belief, we would never think of a reason to insult them and treat them as anything other than honorable people. Even if it is mainly me who rightly denounces the lies of religion and its beliefs as well as sectarianism both verbally and in writing, it is never the case that I, or a Figu member, would ever do this towards a religious believer. Such behavior is absolutely taboo for me and for all Figu members, because this kind of is not part of the repertoire of respectful behavior towards people. For it is absolutely the case, as the saying goes, that every person has to go to market with his own skin, and whether he does so believing or disbelieving is up to him alone. If he himself asks about reality and its irrefutable truth, then the effective truth can be explained to him freely, openly, and in all decency, and without personal offense to his faith, but nothing more, and by no means. Now that I think about it, I should probably add something to Svath's explanations, or simply insert an explanation, which I then insert as a comment to what you have dictated to me. I also think that I'll just dot my I's when Svath makes various statements.
Of course, that will probably be necessary, so you can do that.
Okay, then look here. I got that from Akim too.
Everything you don't understand. Anything you don't understand.
You attribute everything you don't understand to God. For you, God is the place where you sweep aside all the riddles of the world, all the challenges to our intelligence. You just switch off your mind and say, God did it. Carl Sagan.
What do you think? Carl Sagan was a very clever person, an agnostic, someone who could neither affirm nor deny the existence or non-existence of a god or gods or any other higher power. Because for him this could not be proven, because a god is also not recognizable in any way. He wasn't actually sure whether there was a god or not, so he stuck to nature, and therefore to what he saw as reality. So he had nothing to prove or disprove, either for a god or for gods.
What should I think about that? Yes, if I think like that, then it is indeed the case with people on Earth, at least with very many who believe in a god, that they use this in the way Sagan says.
Said, because he was only 62 years old and died in 1996.
I'm not familiar with him.
Then I received the following article from Occam today, which I think you should read. Someone also asked me to show you this article, and ask you what you have to say about it. Here, I've also included it in the July 3 time sign. But it's all just for information, because I don't want to comment on it, and I'm not interested in politics in such a way that I would interfere in them. I only concern myself with pointing out what idiotic politics is and brings or can bring, or what the consequences may or may not be if this or that is or is not done, which is or is not brought about by politics in a negative or positive way and carried out or not carried out. So I only allow myself to judge the whole of the positive or negative aspects of politics, but no more, because I don't interfere in this dirty business, which is generally run by loudmouths and also by absolutely incapable of governing, with a few just exceptions and with relevant knowledge of this and that. The whole government sauce is often only made in a sleazy way by rulers who know nothing about hoots and hollers and do not understand one iota of effective righteousness in politics and for the good of the people, and are not concerned about the good of the people. With very few exceptions, humanity is in fact governed only by hornoxes and idiots who understand nothing of the righteous leadership of a people, but only exploit them with ever higher taxes and fill their own pockets with greed for power and self-importance and greed for money. But here, please.
We are governed by madmen. Holger Strom, 2015.
While reading the FIGU Contact Report, published on 17th of July 2025 with conversations between Billy and Quetzal, I remembered that the freelance journalist Holger Strom had already very aptly described the global political situation at that time in 2015, which also applies exactly to the present of the year 2025 in terms of the boundless insanity of politics. It is truly no exaggeration to say that we are governed by madmen who are working at full speed to reduce everything to rubble. Above all, the USA and the EU dictatorship and all their associated state powers. Excerpt from the FIGU Time Signal Number 1 from April 2015. An ancient prophecy warns of a possible third world conflagration. Freelance journalist Holger Strom. There is a threat of nuclear war in Europe, and we are being controlled by madmen. Fools, if the world were not so full of fools who create wars, terror, peace, overpopulation, lack of freedom, disharmony, as well as unkindness and evil hatred against all reason, then human life would be a paradise on earth. Sim Ya Say. Silver Star Center, 21st February 2012, 17.32 hours. Billy quote, Holger Strom.
And what horrifies me so much is that our politicians are playing on a bench, putting a gun to Russia's head. And we know what America's doing in this whole area. I mean, China is currently being encircled. I mean, 60% of the whole Navy is in the process of encircling China. New air bases are being raised everywhere. And it's not just China. Russia is also being encircled. It's about the New World Order. The Americans, the mafia oligarchs, want to rule the whole world. And they believe that they can only achieve this militarily and are prepared to risk this war in order to be even more powerful and richer. And all reason speaks against it, because they will lose everything. They will also subject their own descendants to horrific torments and infirmity until death. But we are ruled by madmen. I mean, that's nothing new. Piero Rocchini, who was once the chief analyst of the Roman Parliament and Senate, said it quite clearly. And they were all lying on the couch with him. After retiring, he wrote a book entitled Neurosis of Power, in which he stated that more than half of politicians are almost mentally ill, and are unfit to decide the fate of a nation. And none other than Henry Kissinger has said that 90% of politicians are corrupt. So we are ruled by criminally or NSNA people who are prepared to take any risk to gain even more power.
Many Western leaders have recently been comparing Putin to Hitler. But I have the feeling that the Third Reich has reawakened in America. At least that's my fear. And we still have to be ashamed of Hitler. But the fact that completely different people are now playing Hitler and are ready to trigger and provoke a world war that will destroy us all is something that nobody is thinking about, and nobody seems to be coming to their senses. Holger Strom is still active and regularly publishes new videos from his YouTube channel. Achim, Germany.
What this man expresses here corresponds to what is true, and therefore cannot be disputed. However, anyone who contradicts this declaration and this truth is not of sound mind and not capable of clear reason.
You can say that out loud, and it also rhymes with the following article, which was also sent to me, along with a few others that I also included in the site Zeichen, which you also read. However, this one will only appear in number 3 of the July issue, but I think I should send it to you to read.
I do, but I'm not yet familiar with the issue you mentioned. I find what all the media write quite interesting. But the articles in the independent information magazine, InfoSperber, and its corrections and frank statements are particularly valuable in my opinion, as are the issues of the special site Zeichen, which you publish on the internet 3 or 4 times a month. So I want to read this article here too.
Yes, that's what I want.
Good.
Genocide as self-defense. Western media complicit in the genocide in Gaza. We stand up. Tuesday, 15th July 2025 by Peter Henseler. Adapted with thanks from Forum Geopolitica. com/18 July 2025.
Cover image for our series, Bloodbaths Change the World. 14-29 October 2023. The current genocide is the culmination of a spiral of violence that has been going on since 1948 and has been covered up by the powerful in the West for generations. The media portray the genocide as self-defense, but they are nothing less than accomplices.
Introduction. This article deals with a more than unsavory topic. A genocide that is committed in public and not only promoted by most Western media, but justified in such a way that opponents of this genocide, be they Jews or non-Jews, are attacked, vilified and threatened in the most primitive manner. Going up against such a superior force is not only difficult, but downright dangerous. We have decided to stand up. Imagine how you would like to answer the question of your grandchild who sits on your knee in 20 years' time and asks, "Granddad, what did you think about the time when babies were slaughtered in public? Why did everyone keep quiet? Did you keep quiet too?" It all began with a mendacious fairy tale. I was born in Zurich in 1964, and since my earliest childhood, the following axiom has applied: the Israelis are the lovers, and the Palestinians are terrorists. This was instilled in us by our parents and teachers, and we saw ourselves happily confirmed when we were allowed to watch our Israeli heroes defeat the evil Arabs in all the wars on television. Good prevailed. We were on the right side of history and sang Hebrew songs in religious education lessons at a Protestant grammar school. The Israelis are the loved ones, and the Palestinians are terrorists. I didn't realize that this view of things had nothing to do with the truth. My friends and acquaintances felt the same way for decades. Skepticism. The stuff realities are made of. When I traveled to Moscow for the first time in 1997, I was confronted with a character trait of Russians that is completely alien to Westerners: skepticism. Russians have the characteristic, or rather the ability, to take note of all the information they are given, whether by the media or the government, and instead of believing everything, they scrutinize it. The discovery of skepticism shaped me and had a lasting impact on my thinking. Admittedly, questioning is more strenuous than believing, and since most people believe almost everything they are told by parents, teachers, priests, politicians, and the media, skeptics in the West find themselves in an almost fatal minority. What's more, politicians and the media add a democratic flavor to the discussion. They insinuate that the majority view is the right one. This is complete crap, but many even believe in this fairy tale. In the last 30 years or so, I have had a lot of catching up to do. The internet helps me to do this, as it opens up sources that take control of the narrative away from the powerful, although you have to be careful, as people lie until the beams bend on the internet too. However, if you apply skepticism, the internet opens up a universe where you can search for the facts. October 7, 2023, the occasion for the final solution, the series of bloodbaths, when Hamas carried out attack on October 7, 2023, and within hours, there were reports of babies being beheaded and mass atrocities committed by these monsters. We decided to wait and see. We are not a news medium. We took this event as an opportunity to write a series about bloodbaths. The powerful of this world are capable of using any means to achieve their goals, any means. Our aim was to show that bloodbaths, often caused by the victims themselves, are regularly used to justify further, even bloodier carnage in the form of wars. In passing, we realized that the US narrative on 9/11s could not possibly be true. The findings of this series can be summarized in one sentence. The powerful of this world are capable of using any means to achieve their goals, any means. This series is therefore a very suitable introduction to an article that centers on a genocide carried out in public, which is supported or even considered necessary by all Western mass media. Bloodbaths Change the World, Part 1. Bloodbaths Change the World, Part 2. 9/11s. Bloodbaths Change the World, Part 3. Who is behind 9/11s? Israel, from victim to perpetrator to victim. A back and forth for 80 years series. It was only in November that we took on Israel and published a 5-part series on the Israel complex between November 5, 2023 and December 29, 2023 as follows. In Part 1, 1914 to 1948 of our series on the history of Israel, we looked at the period leading up to the founding of the state. A phase of illegal and legal land seizure, as a result of which the State of Israel was proclaimed unilaterally, contrary to UN Resolution 181, and against the will of the Arab states. War from day one was the result. Part 2, 1948 to 1956 ended with the Suez Crisis. As a result of this second war, Great Britain lost its dominant position in the Middle East. Since then, Israel has orientated itself towards the USA in all matters. Another result was the stationing of UN troops on the border between Israel and Egypt. In addition to the Six-Day War and the Yom Kippur War, Part 3 1956 to 1973 dealt with a topic that receives little geopolitical attention when it comes to Israel's water strategy. This is surprising to say the least, as Israel is also extremely consistent in its approach to this issue, regardless of the interests of its neighboring states. Part 4 shed light on the 1982 Lebanon War, a war waged by Israel outside its territory with the aim of destroying the Palestinian PLO, a Palestinian liberation organization whose armed arm had been driven out of the West Bank and into Jordan by Israel in the preceding Yom Kippur War. And then from the Jordanian state to Lebanon after the attempted violent enforcement of political demands in Jordan. Part 5 covers the period from 1993 to the present. We discussed the Oslo Accords of that year, as a result of which the PLO disappeared into insignificance, and Hamas became increasingly important for the Palestinians. Dealing with the history of Israel and the massacres was an eye-opening experience not only for our readers, but also for myself. Nevertheless, it was clear to me that it would not be easy to change the world view, which I had also been given over decades by various agitators and in a wide variety of ways, in average people, as most of them are not skeptics and are simply not able to spend the 200 hours or so it takes to expose the fairy tale as a nightmare. Why should they when the fairy tale feels so much more comfortable and does not deprive you of sleep? Facts and concepts, a genocide is bought. We are touching a hot potato here, and even the disclosure of the facts means nothing less than a frontal attack against a group that is so rich and powerful that they can co-decide presidential elections, Miriam Adelson, and manage not only to commit genocide against women and children in public, but also to present themselves as the victims and get the media to report positively on this unspeakable behavior. This is the first time in human history that a genocide has been labeled a war. In this extensive article, we formulate our opinions only after we have laid a foundation of facts that cannot be undermined, even with all the money in the world. Zionism is not a religion, but a movement that uses criminal means. Zionism and Judaism must be differentiated. Zionism is a movement, not a religion. Its goal is, in a first step, the establishment, justification, and preservation of a Jewish nation-state in Palestine, and, in a second step, the establishment of Greater Israel. Zionism therefore pursues political and not religious goals. This differentiation is essential and is deliberately concealed by Zionists, Western politicians, and the media. The Zionists deliberately mix up the terms Zionism and Judaism and use Judaism as a shield for their political intentions, which they realize by criminal means. As soon as criticism of the criminal actions of the Zionists arises, their critics are labeled as anti-Semites, not only by the Zionists, but by practically all Western politicians and media. As a footnote, Semites are not only the Jews, but a whole group of peoples, including the Arabs, the Ethiopians, the Eritreans, the Maltese, the Assyrians, and many more. So an anti-Semite hates not only the Jews, but all these peoples. another indication of how carelessly language and the meaning of terms are handled. Non-Jewish Zionists control American politics. There are many Zionists who are not Jewish. There are no figures, but estimates are passed around that say that 50% of all Zionists are not Jewish. The Zionists will of course dismiss this as a conspiracy theory. So let's take a look at where money and power meet in America, in the current US government. In addition to the well-known large donation from Adelson to Trump, entire hordes of American politicians are being bought en masse to speak and vote in favor of Israel. In the current 119th U.S. Congress, 532 members, only 32 Jews are represented, 6%. Yet the American Congress, which consists of 87% Christians, has voted staunchly Zionist since 1948. Figures, Pew Research. To achieve a majority in Congress, 50% plus one vote, 266 plus 1 is required. Thus at least 235 non-Jews together with 32 Jews determine the Zionist policy of the United States, which brings the non-Jewish share of Zionists in the U.S. Congress to a whopping 88%. Zionism. Profitable for American Zionist politicians, these members can be described as Christian Zionists, for example Lindsey Graham, Ted Cruz, Marco Rubio, Mike Johnson, Mike Huckabee, and many more. The American Israel Public Affairs Committee (AIPAC) plays an important role in promoting bipartisan support. AIPAC is the only foreign-controlled lobbying organization in the U.S. that is not subject to the Foreign Agents Act. Politicians like Graham, Rubio, and Johnson have received substantial campaign contributions from pro-Israel donors AIPAC, averaging $125,000 for pro-Israel lawmakers compared to $18,000 for those more supportive of Palestine. The Gaza genocide is therefore very profitable for their political supporters in the US. For the figures, The Guardian. And then from the Jordanian state to Lebanon, after the attempted violent enforcement of political demands in Jordan. Part 5 covers the period from 1993 to the present. We discussed the Oslo Accords of that year, as a result of which the PLO disappeared into insignificance, and Hamas became increasingly important for the Palestinians. Dealing with the history of Israel and the massacres was an eye-opening experience not only for our readers, but also for myself. Nevertheless, it was clear to me that it would not be easy to change the world view, which I had also been given over decades by various agitators and in a wide variety of ways, in average people, as most of them are not skeptics and are simply not able to spend the 200 hours or so it takes to expose the fairy tale as a nightmare. Why should they when the fairy tale feels so much more comfortable and it does not deprive you of sleep? Facts and concepts. A genocide is bought. We are touching a hot potato here, and even the disclosure of the facts means nothing less than a frontal attack against a group that is so rich and powerful that they can co-decide presidential elections, Miriam Adelson, and manage not only to commit genocide against women and children in public, but also to present themselves as the victims and get the media to report positively on this unspeakable behavior. This is the first time in human history that a genocide has been labeled a war. In this extensive article, We formulate our opinions only after we have laid a foundation of facts that cannot be undermined, even with all the money in the world. Zionism is not a religion, but a movement that uses criminal means. Zionism and Judaism must be differentiated. Zionism is a movement, not a religion. Its goal is, in a first step, the establishment, justification and preservation of a Jewish nation-state in Palestine, and, in a second step, the establishment of Greater Israel. Zionism therefore pursues political and not religious goals. This differentiation is essential and is deliberately concealed by Zionists, Western politicians and the media. The Zionists deliberately mix up the terms Zionism and Judaism and use Judaism as a shield for their political intentions, which they realize by criminal means. As soon as criticism of the criminal actions of the Zionists arises, their critics are labeled as anti-Semites, not only by the Zionists, but by practically all Western politicians and media. As a footnote, Semites are not only the Jews, but a whole group of peoples, including the Arabs, the Ethiopians, the Eritreans, the Maltese, the Assyrians, and many more. So an anti-Semite hates not only the Jews, but all these peoples. Another indication of how carelessly language and the meaning of terms are handled. Non-Jewish Zionists control American politics. There are many Zionists who are not Jewish. There are no figures, but estimates are passed around that say that 50% of all Zionists are not Jewish. The Zionists will, of course, dismiss this as a conspiracy theory. So let's take a look at where money and power meet in America, in the current US government. In addition to the well-known large donation from Adelson to Trump, entire hordes of American politicians are being bought en masse to speak and vote in favor of Israel. In the current 119th U.S. Congress, 532 members, only 32 Jews are represented, 6%. Yet the American Congress, which consists of 87% Christians, has voted staunchly Zionist since 1948. Figures, Pew Research. To achieve a majority in Congress, 50% plus one vote, 266 plus 1 is required. Thus at least 235 non-Jews together with 32 Jews determine the Zionist policy of the United States, which brings the non-Jewish share of Zionists in the U.S. Congress to a whopping 88%. Zionism. Profitable for American Zionist politicians. These members can be described as Christian Zionists, for example Lindsey Graham, Ted Cruz, Marco Rubio, Mike Johnson, Mike Huckabee, and many more. The American Israel Public Affairs Committee (AIPAC) plays an important role in promoting bipartisan support. AIPAC is the only foreign-controlled lobbying organization in the U.S. that is not subject to the Foreign Agents Act. Politicians like Graham, Rubio, and Johnson have received substantial campaign contributions from pro-Israel donors. AIPAC, averaging $125,000 for pro-Israel lawmakers compared to $18,000 for those more supportive of Palestine. The Gaza genocide is therefore very profitable for their political supporters in the US. For the figures, The Guardian.
Never mind, but something else, namely our federal council in Bern, which is up there as the supreme governing power in Switzerland. However, I am of the opinion that it is a completely failing power and incapable of doing what is necessary. In particular, I am referring to the Federal Council's shortcomings with regard to climate protection and nature conservation. With regard to climate protection, the Federal Council is doing far too little, if anything at all, to curb its constant negative growth, for example, by reducing the current overpopulation of around 9 million in Switzerland by means of a strictly controlled stop to the birth rate. Your grandfather calculated precisely that only 3.5 million people should live in Switzerland. But the country is now populated by more than twice that number, and the number is constantly increasing, with new births alone totaling around 80,000 per year. This alone means that the country is overburdened by the number of refugees still being accepted in Switzerland, which of course counts towards this, but is not so significant. However, it would be urgently necessary to drastically reduce overpopulation in Switzerland by means of birth control and bring it back to the normal level of 3.5 million, just like the whole world as a whole, to only 500 million or a maximum of 530 million, as it was around the year 1680. What would also be the responsibility of the Federal Council, if it really were to fully fulfill its responsibility of governance for Switzerland, would never result in the country's constitution and neutrality being violated, just as, for example, sanctions would not be adopted by the EU dictatorship and imposed on Russia. And this, just as negotiations would not be conducted with the EU dictatorship without the consent of the Swiss people, which would mean that Switzerland's good policy could be caught up in the devil's kitchen and even worse. With regard to climate protection and nature conservation, much more should be done in this respect than has been done to date by the Federal Council, the National Council, and the Council of States. Instead of doing the good and right thing, the opposite and extremely negative things have always been decided, such as allowing farmers to spread more and more poisons in fields and meadows for decades, and now even in forests. Now the Federal Council has even become so irresponsible that, as it proclaimed weeks ago, it would probably prefer to have motorways, etc. built instead of doing something important to preserve and promote natural diversity, which is vital for humans, nature, and all fauna and flora, because without the existence of natural diversity, all life dies. The fact that people are allowed to play federal councillor in Switzerland, who obviously have absolutely no knowledge of this, is more than just a bottomless disgrace. It is also an unparalleled impudence and irresponsibility that cannot be described in words. How dumb and stupid a person must be, in this case a federal councillor, if he wants to have motorways, etc. built as a result of planet hostile, nature hostile, and also fauna hostile and flora hostile overpopulation, instead of being concerned about preserving all necessary natural life and wildlife. In other words, instead of preserving wildlife, he also wants to, for example, wolves and beavers, etc. can simply be shot. But it would be necessary for the population to be reduced by means of a government-imposed massive halt to births, so that all wildlife has sufficient living space again. When you consider that while between 50,000 and 60,000 life forms of fauna and flora are wiped out worldwide every year, the Earthling population continues to multiply by 90 to 120 million and is now already more than 9 billion. While the world population clock incorrectly indicates around 1.5 billion less. But that doesn't seem to bother the male and female federal councillors, and equally the national councillors and councillors of states of both sexes. In fact, the Federal Council now wants to make climate protection and nature conservation even more of a mess, as if it were not enough that the necessary things have not been and are not being done, by irresponsibly wanting to do a lot for overpopulation instead of doing a lot to preserve all life. Out of self-importance and irresponsible use of taxpayers' money, a new financing plan that would damage nature and its fauna and flora, and thus all vital natural life, and expose it to total destruction, has been submitted for consultation in an erroneous and stupid manner. Not only does this really reckless and crazy plan by the incompetent Federal Council mean that the whole of nature and its fauna and flora will lose out financially, and much will be lost. It also requires irresponsible changes to various laws and regulations. In addition, billions of taxpayers' money are to be misdirected towards additional expenditure on objects that arise as a result of overpopulation. instead of sensibly introducing a law on state birth control to reduce it. The nonsensical new financing plan envisaged by the Federal Council not only jeopardizes all the foundations of life and nature, and the entire fauna and flora of the present and the future, but also the lives of the people of the present, their future and future generations. Quite apart from the fact that more and more immense sums of money are required to constantly re-regulate everything until it is ultimately no longer possible to maintain everything and put it in order. This means that the Federal Council's financial and other mismanagement with regard to climate protection, nature conservation, and acting against the Constitution with regard to a sanction received and passed on by a foreign country, and the negotiations with the EU dictatorship are also against the Swiss Constitution, for which each female or male federal councillor currently receives an annual salary of around 480,000 Swiss francs, is more than unjust. Federal councillors, national councillors and councillors of states, etc. of both sexes, as well as employees of various authorities, who are not educated enough or even completely ignorant about nature and its fauna and flora and its vital importance for all life, do not belong in governments and authorities, etc. The fact that nature and its fauna and flora are more important than any and all human achievements and other things, and are vital for the existence of all life, and must first and foremost be protected, cared for and preserved, should actually be clear to every sensible person, whether small or large, rich or poor, government official, office holder or worker, and so on. But now I have a word to say about how traitorous elements are shamefully betraying Swiss neutrality and the Constitution, adopting sanctions from the EU dictatorship and applying them against a foreign country, thereby making a mockery of its friendship with Switzerland. This, as the Federal Council is committing sheer treason as well as a very serious disregard and violation of the Swiss Constitution, making a mockery of the entire state without hesitation. This is being done by unlawfully excluding the people and without their consent, even though this consent is constitutional and predetermined, and only when it is given and exists through a majority positive vote of the people may negotiations be conducted, or negotiations with the EU dictatorship regarding a framework agreement be conducted. What is being done, however, is simply nothing other than the behavior of a dictatorship, whereby the Swiss people cannot agree to such negotiations and agreements because they do not want to be enslaved by the EU dictatorship. And as a free Swiss citizen, the whole thing is to be understood and referred to in this way, because it is nothing but the truth. So I think and know that I have the right to say what is right. Hence the following. If what the Federal Council is negotiating or has already negotiated unconstitutionally with regard to that framework agreement with the EU dictatorship were to come into effect, Switzerland would lose its complete independence and with it its direct democracy. This would mean that Swiss citizens would have nothing more to say and nothing more to decide, because in future only the EU dictatorship in Brussels would do that. In future, this would mean that Switzerland and its entire citizenry would be comprehensively and automatically included in the slavish EU rights, and would have to accept them fully and completely, meaning that Switzerland would be completely governed by the EU dictatorship and would ultimately be drawn into wars. Consequently, the Swiss army would also, and with absolute certainty, in time be seen as liable for war under EU dictatorship law, and one day even obliged to provide military personnel for the NATO murderous organization. As forecasts make clear, there would then no longer be any independence for Switzerland. Moreover, the foreign judges of the EU dictatorship would then decide on Switzerland and its weal and woe, because the framework agreement, if it came about, would then effectively correspond to coercion by the EU dictatorship, and not to a contract of voluntary cooperation, but would therefore correspond to a malignant dictatorship and total abolition of Swiss neutrality and freedom, as well as self-determination of the entire citizenry.
What you say and the fact that you have been talking about EU dictatorship for years has spurred me on to get to the bottom of this confederation of states. And I can only confirm what you say about everything.
That's why I said it. But as far as our federal government is concerned, it must be said that for many decades, it has been allowing more and more poisons to be spread in nature by the agricultural industry, instead of clamping them down and banning them completely. Apart from the fact that the whole of nature, and thus, of course, the entire fauna and flora is being poisoned through and in some cases completely wiped out by all kinds of poisons. There is also the fact that people are being poisoned worse and worse and are suffering from many ailments as a result. The consequences of the application of poisons in agriculture are enormous, and the poisons are mendaciously intended to promote the growth and yield of food crops, as well as to destroy their pests, etc. However, the fact that natural food plants also lose much of their natural nutritional power due to all the poisons and their poisoning procedures, and thus become less valuable, is not mentioned. However, this is also maintained with regard to the fact that all the poison applications of all kinds authorized by the federal government are now also being used in the forests. Although the application of poisons in forests is generally prohibited in Switzerland, the cantons may authorize the application of poisons in justified exceptional cases, as is currently the case for the control of the Asian hornet. However, the fact that this poses major risks to biodiversity, the health of humans and forest wildlife, as well as drinking water, as in agriculture, is apparently of little concern to the federal government, which is staffed by people who don't know the first thing about fauna and flora anyway, let alone the fact that poisons applied in forests can also endanger and kill people through poisoning. The Federal Council wants, probably out of cowardly fear, to deregulate the use of poisons in Swiss forests, as it is called, whereby highly toxic poisons of various kinds and other poisonous substances that are also life-threatening for humans and harmful to the environment may be spread in the forests, allegedly to destroy the Asian hornet, but using poisons that are supposed to be taboo even for agriculture. But the truth is that this is based on cowardly fear, as well as questions of money-making and who benefits from it. The idiotic and completely irresponsible reason for combating the Asian hornet for this really morbidly stupid, and also harmful and dangerous intervention in nature and its entire fauna and flora of the forest, and also the environment outside it jeopardizes everything, and clearly proves that not a single person in the entire federal government has even a glimmer of an idea of biology, and thus of living nature, as well as of the laws of the course of life of fauna and flora, which also includes humans. The Asian hornet is blamed for this nonsense, which is supposed to be stopped from spreading and allegedly attacks bee colonies, which is to be prevented, which is why dangerous poison is to be used, which also jeopardizes people's health and may even have a fatal effect on them. However, Swiss beekeepers have never called for the use of highly toxic substances. Although the beekeepers have more room for maneuver in the fight against hornets with a new ordinance, they are absolutely against the use of toxic substances, which means they are against the use of poisons in forests, and therefore against the spraying of toxic substances in general. The amendment to the Chemical Risk Reduction Ordinance, which is to be adopted in a lack of understanding and common sense by effectively insane and stupidly stupid biological ignoramuses, entails enormous dangers, but this is quite obviously not taken into account due to a lack of the necessary knowledge, which raises the question of why such people, who have neither a significant knowledge of the matter nor can bear responsibility for their wrong decisions, are even allowed into offices of the federal government and the authorities. Such riveting individuals decide on changes that harbor unforeseen dangers and incalculable risks for biodiversity, the health of flora and fauna, and thus also for the environment. However, this also applies to drinking water, which is already widely poisoned by the application of toxins by agriculture and large-scale garden centers, as well as by private gardeners. Effectively, it is also absurd to use biocides to build up biological protection against the effects of all kinds of influences, because biocides are substances or mixtures that are intended to deter, render harmless, or simply combat or destroy organisms of many different genera and species, but which are in fact fundamentally necessary for life in order to preserve the life of fauna and flora, and thus also of humans as a whole. Biocides are also used in areas to idiotically combat organisms such as insects, fungi, bacteria, rodents, and algae, etc., which are simply undesirable but absolutely vital for the preservation of biodiversity. As a result of the whole softening of mankind, many of the biocides are mainly used as disinfectants and, unfortunately, without hesitation as protective agents, but they are also often used thoughtlessly as pesticides or other biocides. For example, as anti-fouling products, etc. Products such as these are used, for example, to protect materials from the adhesion of organisms to surfaces, that is to say, to prevent or at least reduce them, especially on the underwater surface of ships. The fouling or adhesion of organisms such as algae, mussels or barnacles, etc. is of course extremely undesirable, which is why various measures are taken to prevent fouling using special paint coatings or other treatments. Although some products are biological, they do contain biocides or physical properties that repel organisms. However, anti-fouling is also used in other areas, such as water pipes, to prevent the formation of any fouling. Anti-fouling paints can also contain extremely harmful substances, which can then enter the water and be extremely damaging to the environment. It is therefore imperative that alternatives are sought and developed, and that the use of certain substances in particular is regulated. Well, the other thing that results from the large-scale release of toxins into the environment is that the drinking water is poisoned. It is mainly contaminated with so-called PFAS, note from the internet, and polyfluorinated alkyl compounds, which is why various municipalities in different countries have already declared drinking water to be dangerous, and have strictly recommended that people no longer use it. This is because PFAS enter the human body through water and food and pose a health risk. It is 0.00.
I have something to say about this, because it is an area of knowledge that I'm involved in, and I also carry out experiments and investigations. PFAS are substances, as I have learnt according to earthly information leaflets, that are used in industrial products, such as in textiles as well as in electronics. However, PFAS are harmful chemicals that accumulate in all blood carriers or blood-bearing creatures of the fauna, and therefore also in humans. Older people in particular, especially men and to a lesser extent women, are more heavily contaminated with these PFAS chemicals, which are released into the environment in wastewater, as well as in various products from which the PFAS chemicals enter the water in unchanged form, and through this into the plants and soil and, of course, into the bodies of humans and blood-bearing animals, etc., whereby these PFAS chemicals accumulate in the body of the animals. These PFAS chemicals are transferred to the fetus at the earliest stage of pregnancy and accumulate throughout its life, as well as causing and promoting diseases, especially tumors of all kinds. It should be explained that foodstuffs made from animal and animal meat products from blood carrier organisms, but especially from aquatic organisms, are heavily contaminated because they contain particularly large quantities of PFAS chemicals. Through my experiments and research, I was able to establish that PFAS chemicals are deposited particularly in the kidneys, muscles, and liver, which our laboratory specialists at ERA also confirm.
That really doesn't sound good. Not only is everything that depends on water being poisoned, but also the spread of drinking water poisoning or water intoxication or water poisoning, which is harmful to all life and affects everything from which vital water is ingested. I want to say a few more things about this, because I think that there's a lot more to it than that, because climate change and the increasing warmth and heat are making people, animals, and other creatures more thirsty. In humans in particular, this can lead to excessive consumption of water and other liquids, resulting in overhydration of the body, which can quickly become life-threatening. This climate change came about through the fault of humans, namely as a result of the accumulation of the excess mass of the completely insane world population, or overpopulation, and the resulting machinations of the destruction of nature and all the other evil machinations and all the horrendous evils of climate change in general. This has also led to the emergence of forced warmth and heat, which has inevitably promoted all the evil that is now beginning to have an increasingly drastic effect. The emergence of overhydration of the body prevents sufficient sodium and potassium, so-called electrolytes, from being absorbed at the same time, which can lead to a disturbance of the entire electrolyte balance, as well as to various other symptoms, ranging from mild discomfort to life-threatening conditions.
I know a bit about water and drinking too much. Excessive water consumption does indeed lead to a lack of electrolytes, which can then lead to certain medical conditions. Taking certain medications also affects the amount of water, which also influences the excretion of electrolytes. The physical exertion caused by climate change and its great heat alone leads to really heavy sweating and thus to a loss of water, but at the same time, electrolytes are not replaced. This not only leads to severe nausea and dizziness, but also to constant headaches, muscle weakness, and tremors. It also leads to vomiting and dizziness, diarrhea, confusion, muscle cramps, and other seizures, as well as to loss of consciousness and cardiac arrhythmia, but also to respiratory arrest and death. The electrolyte and water balance of infants and small children is not yet fully developed, while older people are often very susceptible to water and electrolyte imbalances. This is because people with certain diseases are severely impaired in terms of water excretion and electrolyte excretion. Of course, you should always drink enough, but never excessively, especially not during heavy physical exertion in extreme heat or hot weather. If drinking water poisoning is suspected, a doctor or emergency room should be consulted immediately. Water poisoning should really be understood as an illness.
Thank you for your explanations, some of which I knew, but which you were able to explain much better and more fully than I could. I only knew a few things from your grandfather, but it was really only sparse. But I think that everything that needed to be said has been said for today. But I'm sure we still need to talk to each other about everything we've postponed for now. I think it's important that we talk about it for a few more moments.
As you say, you've hit the nail on the head. But I'm not going to dictate what else we talk about later, so you don't have to write it down.
We already agreed on that, and that's how it should stay. Then I think you have the first word, so you should start, perhaps with this.
That